This is Allison Kusher
And Cindy Zariello.
with the Grafton Public Library. We're partnering with GCTV to produce our Ask Me Anything series for our Tales and Tales summer reading program. For more information about our summer reading program, go to the Grafton Public Library's website at graftonlibrary.org or sign up directly for the virtual summer program on Beanstack at graftonlibrary.beanstack.com, or you can download the Beanstack app. This reading program is happening all summer long, and it is for all ages, from kids to teens and adults. There's something for everyone.
As you might imagine from our theme, Tales and Tales, our Ask Me Anything series is about animals. We will be interviewing many different animal lovers to find out about what they do and how they interact with their animal. We hope you learn a lot about the various animals we'll be sharing with you. Come into the library if you want to learn more about any of these animals or any other animal. Today we're interviewing Lewis Alderton, who is a beekeeper. So welcome, Lewis. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into beekeeping?
Sure. My name's Lewis. I'm a second year beekeeper. I currently have 3 hives, and I just love the little furry guys.
So why do you love the little furry guys?
Their decentralized behavior, I mean, when you look at the little things, they've got no brain to speak of, and yet the colony itself has so much intelligence about how they build and what they build and how they collect the food and use their resources. It's just a fascinating subject to get into.
So how did you get into it?
In short, I blame Sesame Street. So when I was yay high, I remember watching an episode of Sesame Street, and they were showing a short video about how the bees do the wiggle dance to locate where the good nectar is. And I was just amazed at how something that small could have that much intelligence to do the wiggle dance, how the rest of the bees could figure out what the wiggle dance meant, and how a human could actually decode that and figure out what it was they were doing and not just goofing around. And I must have been 5 or 6 at the time, and it stuck with me. And just my whole life I was just, one day I'm going to get bees. And last year I got bees.
So what's been the most fun you've had since you've gotten your bees?
I think the most interesting thing is day one, when you go to the bee supplier and you buy your bees, and you get a box of around 10,000 bees, and you open up your hive, and you open up this box, and you just pour them like water into the hive. And yeah, I know that's what you. But and then some of them get out, they'll be buzzing around you, but it's just like you don't think of animals like that. But you pour them in, and they just kind of stay there, and then go off and start making honey.
So what is the process?
I'm sorry.
What is the process once you've dumped these?
So there's a little bit more to it than that, obviously. So the bee producers they've got a huge bee yard, and they'll get bees from many hives and just dump them in this box. And then they have a way of mass producing queens. So they'll take a queen in a little cage. Now in this box, you've got your 10,000 bees. Most of them have never met each other, and it's a queen they've never even met. And so you need to keep the queen in her cage, and you'll put the cage in the hive. You'll pour the bees in, and it takes 2 or 3 days for them to get used to her scent. Now at one end, there's a little cork, and underneath the cork is a little bung of candy, and it takes them 2 or 3 days to eat through the candy. And now the queen comes out, they'll accept her, they know her scent, and she'll just get on with her laying.
What kind of special equipment do you need to keep bees?
So you need a hive.
What does a hive look like? Just for some people that might not have seen a hive.
So when you look back to Winnie the Pooh and things like that, you've seen like a cone-shaped hive made out of straw. That's called a skep. That's how the old beekeepers did it. But to do that, you have to destroy everything in the hive to get the honey out. The modern hive, invented in 1850, is called a Langstroth hive. And it's a square box with 10 removable frames. And there's different sizes of frames. You usually have some very deep frames where they'll lay the brood. and they'll make out the honeycomb. The queen will lay the eggs in little combs. They'll cap it over. Babies will hatch, go off, do their thing, and then you put some smaller ones on top where they'll actually put the honey. The good thing about this now is you can take those frames when they're full of honey, spin them out. The honey comes out, and you've left the comb intact, because it takes an awful lot of effort for them to build out that wax. And so once they've got through the first year of building out the wax, they can reuse those year on, and they've saved themselves a heck of a lot of work. They can just get on with the serious business of collecting honey. Sorry, I'm not done.
Okay.
So you need a hive.
Yep.
With the frames, and you need to make sure there's enough room for them to have the brood and the honey, because if they get to the point where there's not enough room for the babies, it's all honey, they're going to fly off and find somewhere else to live. They'll swarm. You'll need a bee suit. So at a minimum, you really need a veil, and most of the time I don't wear gloves, but sometimes when they're a bit grumpy, you will need the gloves, and a smoker. Now the smoker actually does two things. The first is, inside the hive is completely dark. They can't see a thing. So they communicate using scent. So once you puff smoke in there, you destroy that scent communication. So if you do something bad like jolt the hive and some of the bees get upset, they can no longer signal to anyone else to attack you. So it pacifies them that way. Also, when bees smell fire, they think our home is at risk, and they will gorge themselves on honey, ready to fly and find a new home. So you'll actually see when you start taking the hive open, you put a puff of smoke on, you'll see them dive inside the hive to eat the honey, and you stop their signalling. So now it's much easier for you to go in and work the hive without them getting upset and trying to sting you.
Cool. So how do you know when you need to add a new leaf or whatever it is
It's called a super.
How do you know when to add a new super?
That is a great question, and if you ask 4 beekeepers, you'll get 5 answers. So there's two things you have to balance. One is they have to have enough space to do their thing, but if you give them too much space, they have trouble keeping that warm, and they have trouble defending it. So it's really one of those things that comes with time, I've been told. Right now, temperature isn't an issue. They need to keep their brood frames at 95 degrees. So if you put too much space in the cold months, they can't keep it warm enough, and they just won't be able to bring up enough of the young. Right now, temperature's not an issue. It's really just, can they defend the space that they have from moths and other insects that get in. Usually what you do, I said earlier there were 10 frames. Mm-hmm. When you get to 7 or 8 frames full on one level, that's when you add the next one. And then they'll start to move around, fill that up, and do their thing.
Cool. There's a lot to learn from beekeeping.
There's a school. So the Worcester Beekeepers Association is the oldest beekeeping association in the United States, and one of the largest. And every spring they have, I think it's an 8-week-long beekeeping school. So you go one evening a week. And they will tell you everything from the basics of, this is how you set up a hive, to looking for diseases and how to treat them, and how to plant the plants that attract the bees, and how to protect yourself and your pets from bee stings, and more than you can ever imagine. I mean, it's one of these things, you have to go through it twice, there's just so much information. Mm-hmm. So they also have a mentoring program where they have people that have been beekeepers for 50 plus years, and they are more than helpful. They'll come to your hives and help you look through them and look for problems and give you hints and suggestions. So there's a huge beekeeping community. Massachusetts is one of the best places to be a beekeeper, just because of the help you can get.
Wow, that's fascinating.
What's the hardest part about being a beekeeper?
Getting stung. and it's hard for 2 reasons. One is because it hurts. Fortunately, I don't have any allergies. I do keep an EpiPen in case someone around me does. But if I do something wrong and that causes a bee to sting me, that bee will die. And that's what makes me sad. So that's really the hardest part of it. Me doing something silly and causing a bee to lose its life.
What is something no one would ever guess about being a beekeeper?
Well, that's a very good question. guess. I mean, there's so much information out there. If you're at all interested, I think you'd know the basics. I think the hardest thing for me was realizing that the queens only have a useful lifespan of 2 to 3 years. And after that, their egg production starts to take a drop and you need to replace her. Sometimes the bees will realize she's not laying as well and they will replace her themselves. But she's laying around 1,500 eggs a day. So she's very, very busy.
As queens are.
When she hatches, we're going to get into the gory details now, so cover your ears, kids. When she hatches, the queen hatches, she will go on a mating flight for 2 or 3 days, and she will mate with between 15 and 30 men, drones. She will then store up enough sperm to last her the rest of her life. She'll fly back to the hive, and she will never leave. So she will use the sperm that she's collected to just lay those eggs, and eventually it's going to run out, and she can only lay drones at that point, or she'll stop laying. The bees will realise something's wrong. They'll produce new queen cells, and they'll either kill her or wait for the newly hatched queen to kill her.
So you mentioned drones and queens. Are there other types or hierarchy of bees?
There's 3 kinds.
Okay.
So we have the queen, the workers, and the drones. Now the workers, when a worker hatches, she'll spend the first 1 to 3 weeks of her life just inside the hive. First thing they do when they hatch is they clean out the cell they hatched from, so it's ready for the queen to lay another egg in it. Then they may tend to the queen, they may tend to the larva and the eggs that are already in there. Some of them will actually take nectar and pollen from the foragers, and they'll store that, they'll tend to the stores. From 3 to 6 weeks, they will actually go out foraging and work themselves to death. But some will forage for nectar, some will forage for pollen. And it was, I think, as recently as the 70s, they realised there was a third class of forager that would just go and get water. So humans have a very, very long history with bees, and we're still learning a phenomenal amount about them. I think, how many Nobel Prizes? There was the guy who actually discovered and decoded the wiggle dance got a Nobel Prize. He decoded it in the 30s, and I think he got a Nobel Prize in 1970 for that. And there's a lot of research going on into why and how bees swarm and decide where to go, and discoveries of water. Right now, most of the research, I think, is going into controlling the varroa mites, which is doing a very, very good job of decimating a lot of hives.
So are there any considerations that you should think about before getting into beekeeping?
The most common problems I hear of are the problems with neighbours not liking bees. And most of that's just down to education, because a lot of people can recall, being stung by something as a kid. Mm-hmm. And it's almost definitely not a honeybee. It's a wasp, a yellow jacket, a hornet or something. Bees really don't like to sting. So, if you ask somebody, what did you get stung by? Was it a bee or a wasp? They'll most likely say, well, I don't know. You do have problems with bees visiting your neighbour's swimming pool. But most of these can be mitigated by careful positioning of the hive. Most of the time, when the bee comes out of the hive, they fly up and away. So as long as they've got a little path, and you can put a barrier, a bush or something to help them go up, face them away from the pool or whatever, and just give your neighbour a jar of honey. That usually mitigates most things.
So how often do you collect honey, and how much honey would you get from one beehive? It's
seasonal.
Okay.
Now, I'm a second-year beekeeper. Usually the first year, you won't get any honey. They put a lot of effort into just building out the combs, and they need a bit of honey to get through the winter, so they're going to keep that. On a good year, you can expect 40 to 60 pounds of honey per hive, which is good. That's and then when you extract the honey, you scrape up a layer of wax, and then you can keep that wax to make candles. soaps, creams, a whole bunch of other beauty products as well. So last year was actually a bad year for me for honey. This year, I have one hive that's doing well, and they're actually laying down lots of honey, so it's looking good.
Good. So do you need anything special to extract the honey?
Yes. So, and it's actually a very messy process. So, you have the rectangular frames, and what the bees will do is when they bring back the nectar, they'll mix it with some enzymes from their gut, put that into the honeycomb, and they'll leave it open until it reaches the right moisture level. So they wait for the moisture level to go down, and they put a layer of wax over it. Now, people have found honey from Egypt from 2,000 years ago, and it's still edible. So once it's capped and protected by the wax, it lasts an incredibly long time. What you do is you get a sharp knife and you just kind of scrape the top layer of wax off, and then you have a big spinner, like a centrifuge. So you'll put your frames in, and you'll spin it for a few minutes, and the wax just the honey will just like splat out to the side, run down. And then it's over a couple of hours, just let it all run down. You can open a gate at the bottom and just honey pours out. You'll still need to strain it to get rid of a few, bee legs and blobs of wax and things. But there's some very good strainers out there, and then you pretty much just put it straight in the bottles, and there's your wax. There's your wax. Don't eat the wax. The most local beekeepers, what they will do is the wax goes, straight from the frames into bottles and is raw. It still contains a lot of pollen, local pollen. So a lot of people are buying that honey because they believe that helps a lot with allergies, and it just tastes so good. The stuff you buy from the supermarkets is very different. It's been pasteurized and filtered. There's almost no pollen left in it. And there's really no telling how much syrup it's been cut with, just to bulk it out a little bit. So when you go to your farmer's market and you see the price of a little jar of honey, it's well worth it because you're getting a different product than you would from the supermarkets.
Okay. That's good to know. Is it expensive to get started in this?
Not if you've got lots of money. So I'm trying to think. I bought a beginner's bee package. So my first hive with the beekeeping suit, smoker, all the stuff that I needed, and including the bees. And it came in at around $600 or $650 for one hive. Okay. Somewhere along the road, I've moved from one hive to three. I really don't know how that happened. So there was that upfront investment, but once you've bought the hives, that's really it. Now, if you can get your bees to last through the winter, then you can keep the hive going year round. That's good. Unfortunately, I lost my two hives over the winter, and so it cost about $150 to buy that package of bees to get them restarted again. Mm-hmm.
And the extractor, is that an additional fee as well? Or?
If you want to buy your own extractor, you're looking at around $500 for a reasonable one. Plus, you'll need like a big sink-like thing to a decapping tank.
Is there a way to rent it from somebody else, or?
Yes, if you're a member of the Worcester Beekeepers Association, you can rent one for 2 or 3 days for $15. Oh. So they'll actually rent out the extracting tanks, the spinner, the knives, everything you need for a very, very affordable price. So it really is a really good association to be part of.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a wonderful place for education and for renting of things.
And just the wealth of knowledge that they have. They're great people.
That's awesome.
They didn't pay me to say that, by the way.
All views are expressly your own.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do we want to talk about chickens?
Do you want to talk about chickens too?
Sure, I've had chickens for 6 weeks now, so I'm an expert on chickens. This is something else I've been wanting to do for years and years and years, and finally last year I managed to get a house. I had enough room for the chickens. We started off with 9 2-day-old chicks, and they cute little fluffy things, and we decided that I think we're allowed to keep 10 in Grafton. Each town has restrictions on how many you can have. So we went with 9, so I could have 3 different breeds, 3 of each. And then, unfortunately, one of them didn't make it. They got held up in shipping, and when they ship them when they're freshly hatched, so they have the yolk to sustain them for 2 days. If you leave them past that, they can actually get to the point where they've expended the yolk and not quite ready to eat, and they can get sick. And that happened. It happens a lot. So we went back to the supplier, and instead of replacing that one, we ended up getting 2 because we got a replacement one, and we also had one that laid green eggs, and we just like the idea of having green eggs. So now we have 10 chickens.
So you can have green eggs and ham, huh?
Absolutely, yes.
With Dr.
With
Seuss.
honey.
Dr. Seuss would be proud of that, and honey. Yes. So yes, we have 10 chickens. They're all named, but I can't name them. So Jessica named them, so you can blame her for that. She's named after her friends and relatives, I think. They're now 6 or 7 weeks old. They're outside. It's amazing watching their changes in behaviour from little tiny chicks to now they're much more into running around and foraging and pecking anything that moves. I think they have this little song going through their head. If it moves, peck it. If it doesn't, peck it till it does. And so they'll pick up anything that looks like a worm and run around, and the others will chase them. I had my other shoes on. They'll go for the laces and chew the aglets off them. So all my shoelaces are frayed now. They're just funny little animals to watch.
So do you let them run around wild in your yard at all, or do you keep them in their
We
pen?
will not be doing that. They are
Okay.
penned in. Some people do, and you don't have to look far before you hear of someone who lost a chicken to an eagle or raccoons or fisher cats or cats. There's so many things out there that can get them.
Yeah.
So we think we have a pretty impenetrable little fortress for them. I spent way too long building it.
Did
and
you
the
have
first
fun
night,
doing it, though?
Absolutely. I got to play with power tools. Even the first night we had the chickens out and we blocked them in the coop, the next morning we could see that someone had tried to dig under. Which, I read a lot before I built it, and they say, yes, you're going to have the wire mesh coming down and out, so when they dig down, they're going to hit that mesh straight away. And they did. So they're still safe.
Thank goodness. So at what point do they start laying eggs? Do you know? Because I'm sure they haven't at this point.
It's around 4 months.
Okay.
4.5 months. So they are, I believe, 7 weeks now. So we've got a ways to go.
Mm-hmm.
So we're still just
Enjoying
feeding them
watching them.
and yes, waiting for that
Growing.
first egg.
Awesome. And so why did you want chickens? We know why, because of Sesame Street you want bees. Was there any similar experience with the chickens?
Not that I can think of. But last year was kind of the de facto year of the chicken, with everyone in isolation. The number of people keeping backyard chickens just skyrocketed. I guess there was nothing else to do.
All the pets were adopted.
Yes.
So what do the chickens eat?
Shoelaces.
Everything.
Yeah.
You buy you start off with a little starter crumble. These are little tiny grains of. It has everything that they need, and then so you just pour that into a bowl and they just come along and just peck at that. And as they get bigger, you give them a bigger like a pellet. We also feed them a little bit of grit right now, just to help break down things in their crop. And now they're at the age where they can eat mealworms and these little dried worms. So if you get a handful of these worms and you put your hand out into the coop, you'll be mobbed. They will run over themselves just to try and grab these things. I mean, it's like throwing hot dogs at a bunch of 5-year-olds. They really do just stampede at these things.
So when I'm pulling the ticks off my dog, should I save them and give them to you to have the chicks eat
Yes,
them?
please.
Okay.
So back to the beekeeping. Everything goes back to bees. There was a discussion on one of the Facebook groups about how can I control ticks in my backyard without putting down dangerous chemicals that might hurt the bees. And I think everyone overwhelmingly responded, get chickens. They'll eat ticks. So one of the things I'm going to try and do is have a little portable enclosure I can move around the garden put some of the chickens in. That way they're still protected, and they can get all the bugs and grubs and good stuff in the grass.
And then you get a win-win.
Win-win. And the people that do things like this, so the chickens are able to eat a lot more bugs. They say that the difference in the flavour and texture of the eggs is amazing.
Well, if you want to bring that cage to my house and set it up, you're more than welcome, because I'm sure we have more than enough ticks to share.
Maybe I'll do that, but I get to keep the eggs.
That's
Traveling
fine.
chicks.
That's okay. I might give you some egg cartons for eggs.
Yes, please. I think we can arrange something there.
So what do you do with the chicken poop?
So right now, they've just moved outside. So they were indoors, and what we were doing, we had a little brood box inside. We would put pine shavings in. They would
Do their duty.
and we just put a few more pine shavings in every couple of days. We just clean it out and dump it. There's a way of deep littering the coop. So you do the same thing, but you can actually build it up for many months. And as long as it stays fairly dry, and the pine shavings should keep it fairly dry, apparently it'll build up without smelling too much. So that's one thing we're going to try. And again, you ask, 4 chicken keepers, you'll get 5 different answers on how you do that.
Yeah.
The run, we're laying down some sand so we can rake that and hopefully pick up some of the chicken poo.
Oh, neat. So then, once you have like all these shavings and stuff like that, would you then, once it builds up over however many months, would you go in and like shovel it out and like
Yeah, then we'll
compost
compost
it?
it. Compost really, really, really well. And a lot of people say that the chicken poo compost is really, really good for your vegetables. So
That's interesting.
that's what we're going to try.
Reduce, reuse, recycle, right? Are there any other questions that you can think of?
No, I think we are to our last question, which is, what is your favorite book? Or what book have you enjoyed reading recently?
So I'm going to give you 2 answers.
Okay.
I want to say my all-time favourite book would have to be The Wasp Factory by Ian Banks. When I read that, I didn't know what to expect, but it certainly wasn't what I read. Very interesting book. In regards to beekeeping, Honeybee Democracy is one of the best books I've read in a long time. It described how the researcher Tom Seeley was looking at how, when you get a honeybee swarm and you have all these foraging bees going out looking for a new place to live, do they decide out of all the options which one do they choose? And so he did all sorts of experiments in remote islands so there wouldn't be interference from other honeybee colonies, and he could control exactly what resources and homes were available, which ones did they choose, and he would watch them coming back and do the wiggle dance. And he would see that when there was a consensus being formed about this seems to be the best home, there was the same dance going on and on, but it wasn't the same bee every time. So he would mark the bees and realise that the bees would visit the hive, the potential hive, only once. He'd do the wiggle dance, she would do the wiggle dance, because it was always the ladies. And then someone else would decide to check it out. And if it was a good home, they'd do an even more vigorous wiggle dance. And so every time the wiggle dance got repeated for that one location, it was always a different bee. And eventually they decided that, okay, this is the best one. And just doing the research into it and figuring out what's going on and which pheromones they're using, it just blew my mind. The hours that were put into just, deciphering what the bees are doing was amazing.
That sounds fascinating. Are there any books that you would suggest that if the library doesn't have, that we should get as far as beekeeping?
Yes, but I don't have the list on me right now.
That's okay. You can get it to us later if you want.
Yeah. Excuse me, I'm going to cough.
Do you need something to drink?
No, I'm good. Oh, well, yes, but not water. The Worcester Beekeepers Association, when they do the bee school, there's a list of, we suggest you read these books. And the kind of books that have a lot of very basic information in to help you get started, but also serve as very good reference books. So for your 2nd and 3rd year, when you're not quite sure what to do, or you think there's something wrong with the hive, you can go and take a look at it, and it'll help you through. So I think there were 3 books on the list that I got, and actually very good.
Okay. Fabulous. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for coming, and
Thank you for inviting me. I had a good time here.
we had a great time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.